Hi everybody, it's Kerrie here from the North East Autism Society. Thank you for joining us again for our live Q&A session. Today's session is going to be Emotional Wellbeing Part 2 as a follow-on from last week. The first part, we're going to look at possible behaviours that you may see in your children and young people. We're then going to look at why that might actually occur, and then we're going to think about some possible strategies. Now, as I said last week, this is quite difficult because all your children and young people will be very individual and they will have very individual needs. So you can ask questions as we go along, but just be aware that, you know, I need to know a little bit more usually about your child or adult to be able to answer them effectively. But please post questions in as we go along. So we started talking last week about emotional well-being and what that actually means, and you know, we started to talk about that is really the building blocks, it's the foundations, if you like, of everything in life that's important, because if we are not emotionally okay, then we're going to find academic learning difficult, we're going to find daily living tasks difficult, like making a cup of tea, going shopping, driving a car, things like that. So emotional well-being is really the building blocks and the foundations, so we need to get that right in our children and young people before we put other things on them, really. Okay, now some of the behaviours that you may see in your homes and in your families can really vary. They really can, and there's hundreds and thousands of different behaviours that you may see. So your child may be exhibiting maybe aggressive behaviour towards you, so in the form of biting, hitting, kicking, headbutting, things like this. They may be exhibiting self-harming behaviours, so it might be that they're actually hurting themselves. They may be displaying ritualistic and obsessive behaviours, so doing the same thing over and over again, which brings about safety in a lot of our service users. They may also, which we often forget about really, they may just withdraw. When we think about behaviour, we think about them kind of big meltdowns and then big outbursts. We need to remember that some of our young people will just completely withdraw and shut down and will become very quiet and not really want to engage with people or the outside community. Okay, so lots of different behaviours to consider: smearing feces, biting, hurting themselves, running away, so absconding from you, you know, when you're out and about in the supermarket. It could be lots of sensory behaviours, so it could be rubbing hair, it could be jumping up and down, it could be watching DVDs over and again on repeat. So lots and lots of different behaviours that we could look at. So what we were talking about last week was really the tip of the iceberg. So the tip of the iceberg is then behaviours that you see in your children. And what we discussed last week is we've got to work out what the trigger point is for them. So what is it that's fueling that behaviour? And you can see this in yourselves. So you know, you might miss your bus to get to work, so you get on the bus when it finally arrives and you feel a bit angry towards the bus driver. There is a reason that you're behaving in that angry manner. It's the trigger point is because the bus was late and now you're going to be late for work. So you can identify quite quickly what is the trigger point for you. For our children and our young people, that's sometimes a lot harder, and it's sometimes a lot more difficult because a lot of our individuals have communication difficulties, so that puts that extra complexity in there really. They're not able to openly tell you why they're feeling angry and why they're feeling sad, so communication is a big reason for why we see behaviour in a lot of our individuals. Okay, one of the other reasons is sensory. Now, I know earlier on this month we did do a sensory session, which we are going to repeat because we want to break it down into specific sections, because sensory is such a big area. But the reason that your child or adult could be exhibiting a certain behaviour is because of sensory. So they could be too heightened, or they could be not getting enough stimulation, so they have to create it themselves. So the child that throws himself on the floor in the supermarket and starts rolling round, possibly, if he has autism, isn't having a temper tantrum and trying to be naughty, he's actually trying to get rid of some sensory stimulation that's going on in that environment. And that could be anything from the hum of the refrigerators, to the bright lights, to the smell of the chickens that are cooking in the supermarket. Okay, so sensory is usually a massive part of behaviour, and it's something that we really can't overlook. We've really got to consider it when we're looking at individuals' behaviours. Okay, the next reason that we sometimes see behaviours is around something called executive functioning. Now, we are going to do a separate session completely dedicated to executive functioning because it is such a big topic. But what I mean by executive functioning is it's about the way that you process information. So it's about the way your brain plans, sequences, remembers things, multitasks and prioritises. So it's all them important skills that really gets the job done. So you will use executive functioning when you're planning a Christmas dinner, when you're booking a holiday, when you need to get ready for a night out. That is all your executive functioning skills that you're using at that time, okay? Now, we know, again, for individuals with autism, executive functioning is something that they can find really, really difficult. So you may have see a negative behaviour in your child because the swimming baths are closed. Every week they go to the swimming baths and this week it's closed. Now, the difficulty there is, from an executive functioning point of view, a lot of individuals struggle with the concept of change because change requires that flexible thinking process. It requires the ability to see a problem and think, right, what do I have to do about it? And you have to change the way you're thinking quite quickly. A lot of the individuals we see can find that really, really difficult. So executive functioning skills play a massive part in the behaviours that we see, okay, in some of our individuals, but you can teach them skills as well through different programmes. The next common reason for behaviours that you may see in your young people or your children is social requirements. So in the world that we live in, we demand certain social expectations from our children and our young people. So, you know, we're expected to go into a cafe and sit down and not scream and shout. We're expected to go into a classroom and sit and attend to a lesson for an hour. Now, a lot of our children and young people will do that because that's what's expected of them. But inside, it's making them really stressed out and really anxious. But they know that that's how they need to behave sometimes in that environment, so they hold it all together. And this is quite common in this kind of after school meltdown effect that we see quite a bit, or after college meltdown effect. So the individuals kept it together all day because they know they need to behave in a certain way in that environment. They get home, and as soon as they cross the threshold of their house, they have that kind of big meltdown or big shutdown as well. And I have a lot of families asking me about that, and that's because they've conformed all day and they've had to sit straight in the seats and keep still when they've really needed a movement break, okay? So social demands play a big part in the behaviours that you might see in some of your people, okay? The other one is something called theory of mind. Now, again, we're not going to talk about this too much in depth today because this could be a separate session in itself. But theory of mind is about the ability to understand that other people have different beliefs, different feelings, and different thought processes to you, okay? Now, that's really difficult for people on the autism spectrum. So if I'm sitting here now and I don't understand the person with autism, they might get quite frustrated because they assume what's in their head is in your head as well, okay? Now, this can affect things like empathy. So you might be very upset because something's happened and the child or adult finds it very difficult to empathise with you because in their head, they can't work out why you would be feeling like that, okay, if that makes sense. So theory of mind is a big subject in itself, so we will touch on that separately, okay? They're just a few different reasons why we see behaviours. Now, remember, there's other stuff going on. Is it pain? Is it that they're too hot? Are they hungry? And again, we need to make sure most basic needs are met, because if you don't have the communicative ability to tell someone that you're in pain, then what are you going to do? You're going to exhibit behaviour. You're going to hit someone. You're going to bang your head off a wall. You will do something to try and communicate what you're feeling inside, okay? Now, the next part is possible strategies, and this is where it gets a little bit difficult, especially when you're speaking to a group like this, because you will all have very unique children or adults. But some of the specific strategies that I would kind of discuss are, the first one is communication. So make sure your child or adult has the right communication aids. Now, whether or not that is a textbook or a pen and a notebook, it doesn't matter. Whatever works for them. I had a young man once who when he arrived with me, they said he has very, very limited communication. He's never communicated anything to us before in his life. And when we were on the beach one day, he actually started to write in the sand, and he wrote ice cream in the sand. So that was amazing. That was like a kind of, you know, one of them moments where, you know, I still get a shiver when I think about it now, because it was like magic. So we quickly got him an ice cream. What he learned from that quite quickly was, I have the power over my environment. I can actually communicate through the written word. So we gave him a notebook, and he started to write things, and that opened up that whole his whole world, really. So you need to be working hopefully with your speech therapist to make sure that you're getting the right support around communication. Okay, the next one is sensory, which, you know, I keep going on about, but it really, really is key in autism. Making sure that your individual has a sensory program or a sensory diet, which again we will touch on in a different session, but really making sure the sensory needs are met. So, for example, if you have a young man who needs a break in the middle of the day to move himself around because he can't sit still in a chair, then that young man needs that break. If you imagine keeping him in that seat and telling him he needs to do, you know, his lessons and not move, he's going to get stressed out. He's going to get anxious. He could potentially lash out. He could potentially run away, because he's trying to communicate that, hang on a minute, my body needs something here and I'm not getting it. So I'm going to communicate it in any way possible. So sensory input is really important. Having maybe a sensory diet or a sensory program in place can often help the individual regulate themselves and reduce a lot of that anxiety. Okay. Teaching social skills is also very important, and you can do this through something called social stories, if anyone's familiar with them. They're absolutely brilliant, and what they do is they put the young person in the centre of the story, and they actually teach them certain skills. So we've used them before for a young man who really wanted to play with his peers, but he didn't know how to go about it. So, you know, we have this idea from textbooks from many years ago that people with autism don't want friends and they don't want relationships. Actually, that's not completely accurate. A lot of them do, they just don't know how to go about it. So for him, we implemented a social story, and it gave him a step-by-step breakdown of what he needed to do to become friends with somebody, and that was really effective for him. Okay, so teaching social skills. There's also a really good game called Socially Speaking, which is actually a board game, which is a really good resource as well. Okay. The next thing, possible strategy, is something called the TEACH program. Now, you're possibly all using this anyway, but you might not know that it's called a TEACH program. It's about the who, what, where, when, and why of situations. So if you're going to the supermarket and then you're stopping off at McDonald's on the way home, tell your young person that's going to happen. So it can be in the form of a visual planner. It can be in the form of a written list. And it's not just for big visual routines as well. It's for tasks that you need to break down. So getting somebody to have a shower, you might need to break every step of that down. Getting them to understand how to make a cup of tea, we break that down. What the TEACH system brings about is structure, routine and predictability, which we know is something that a lot of our individuals really, really need, because it helps them feel safe and it helps the world be more accessible for them. It makes it a safer place, really. So the TEACH program is really very, very useful, and if you want any more information on that, you can get in touch about that. Okay. The next one is around clear expectations and clear communication. So here at NEAS we use sets of rules around different environments. So it tells the service user what they need to do as opposed to what they shouldn't do. So instead of saying no kicking, we would have it very explicit. So keep your feet on the floor. So it's giving them that very concrete instruction of what they need to do. Often our service users actually feel safer having that structure in place, because it gives them very clear boundaries of what they need to do and what they shouldn't do. Okay, so rules, you can do them in visuals, you can do them in photographs, whatever works really for your child or adult. Okay. Another strategy that we use at NEAS sometimes, if you've got one of our service users who is demanding attention, and that could be in a negative or a positive way, and it could be for many different reasons. One of the well-known techniques that is used across the field all the time, is something called planned ignoring. So that is where you ignore that behaviour but you reinforce the positive behaviour. Okay, and that can work effectively as well. What I will say with any of these techniques though, you need to be consistent. So you need to be doing the same as school needs to be doing the same as home. And I would really recommend that you get in touch with your children's schools or colleges and say, right, what do you do? What do you do in school when he does this? And can you offer us any tips? And then replicating that at home and being very, very consistent. I appreciate consistency is difficult when you've all got busy lives, and I know that a lot of you are also very sleep deprived. I know it can be really difficult, but consistency is really key when you're supporting anyone with any kind of behaviour differences really. Some other things to think about. The last thing I really want to touch about is when we did the activity last week with the glasses. If people didn't see it, you can see it on our website. We were talking about emotional regulation. Now, emotional regulation is about firstly identifying emotions, so identifying how you feel, and then identifying what you need to do to make yourself feel better. Okay, now there's a couple of different ways that you can teach this, and the first step really is getting individuals to recognise emotions. And when you're teaching recognising emotions, it's about what does a facial expression look like? So what does a smile look like? Does that mean that a person's happy? What does a grimace look like? Does that mean that that person's angry? And we know that individuals with autism have difficulties with facial expressions. So that really is one of the first steps. We have to recognise that. Then what we would do is connect that kind of facial expression to internal feelings. So, okay, that person's smiling. How might they feel inside? Do you think they feel like they've got butterflies in the, not butterflies in the tummy because they might take that literal, but do they have that kind of excited feeling? And is that what is linking up to the happy smiley face? Then the third key really is linking it to a situation. So okay, that person looks happy, they might be feeling like this internally, and they're in their favourite shop in the metro centre and they're going to buy some new shoes. So it's about connecting all them dots. You need to teach emotions before you obviously teach emotional regulation, because you need to know the different emotions, and the basic ones are happy, sad, angry and worried. Start with the simple ones there first. Okay, there is some good resources around teaching emotional regulation. We are going to put them on the website after this so that you can just read them, and we'll put the links on there as well. But one of the really good resources that we use a lot is something called the Incredible 5-Point Scale. And what that does is it gives the young person the ability to identify where they are on a scale. So you have usually 5 different points. 1 is I'm feeling okay now. 5 is I've lost it, I'm having a complete meltdown. Now, a lot of our young people will go from 1 to 5 very quickly. The idea with the 5-point scale is that the young person starts to identify where they are and work out strategies for either bringing themselves back down or making themselves more alert in some way. Okay, so that is one resource. There's a very good book as well called Starving the Anxiety Gremlin. Now, this book doesn't work for everyone, so that's why I talk about it in here as a resource that you may use. It's kind of a little bit like CBT, but it's specific for children, and it's specific around children that are visual learners, which we know a lot of our people with autism are. So Starving the Anxiety Gremlin, we'll put the link up for you. Okay, there's some other things as well, but I'm not going to talk about them now. I'm going to get Lisa to share it all with you. We're going to end there, and what I'm going to do is ask if anyone's got any questions. So Lisa's sitting in front of me now, and she's going to tell me if we've got any questions. No?
We haven't today.
No, we haven't got any questions today. So, but we've got 5 people viewing, so that's good, and it kept going up to 10 and back down. So thank you very much if you've joined us, and give us a little like if you did find it useful. So next week we will be back online again, and we're going to be looking at sensory, but we're going to break it down into, I'm just getting a question from Karen Fenton. My daughter talks or reacts what happens through the day. Is this to do with her being stressed? It could be, Karen, it could be a build-up, so it could be talks or reacts what's happening. So it could be that all that stuff is just building up, and then she's got to talk about when she gets home. Another thing to think about is a lot of people with autism tell us that if they experience a bad time, so they go to the swimming pool and something happens and they get really upset, the next time they go to the swimming pool, they feel it again. Now, if we did that, we'd just think, we had a really bad time here last time, it wasn't great, was it? People with autism have described that they feel the emotions like they felt them the first time, so they almost relive the situation. So it could be something like that as well that's going on. But if you do want to talk more about that, and if that doesn't help, then feel free to give me a call at NIAS as well. But thank you for joining us, Karen, and asking the question. So next week we're going to do sensory part 1, and we're going to break it down into probably about 5 or 6 different parts, because we're going to cover each sense really, and really go into it in some depth, because we know it's an area that parents have been asking for more information about. So I've loved being here with you all. Thank you for tuning in, and we shall see you next week. Have a lovely weekend, everybody. Bye.